Hi everyone, my name is Thomas and I am the race meteorologist for the World's Toughest Rows Atlantic Crossing 2023. And I've been helping Carsten and Ian looking into the weather situation recently up until race start here, which we have decided will be the 13th in the morning. So just to give a quick introduction to myself, I have been supporting the World's Toughest Row, also known as Atlantic Challenge previously. Since 2018, I also supported the Pacific crossing here this summer, and besides that, I have been working on the Volvo Ocean Race in 14, 15, and 17 and 18. I've been doing weather forecasts for Formula E, Cold Hawaii Games, Red Bull King of the Air, and other events. But yeah, so I have some knowledge about this particular crossing, which you'll be heading into. So I have some guidance for you guys and some overview of the weather situation, and I would like to also give you my perspective, which is mostly concerning safety, but also to some extent helping you to maybe be able to decide the optimum route to get fastest across from Gomera to Antigua. Let's see if I can get the next slide. So, okay, this is a synoptic overview, which is showing you the low pressure systems of the Atlantic Ocean, where the high pressure zones are, and we have here the Canary Islands. So right now we have been having a high pressure system over the Northern Africa, which have been teasing a bit with the wind gradients to give not ideally favored wind direction for the start on the 12th. So we decided to go safe and go for the 13th. We have this huge frontal wave here crossing the Atlantic Ocean. This frontal wave is a bit disturbed, so we'll create a low pressure system a bit later in the period, and we have a lot of energy moving around in the northern part of the Atlantic Ocean. I'll explain more about that a bit later. So this is a situation from today, Monday, the 11th in the morning. This is the outlook for the 13th of December at midnight, just before you guys are heading out. So as I mentioned, this frontal wave is starting to get disturbed, and we have a low pressure system developing here well to the west of where the Canary Islands are, but it does have some effect to you guys. Luckily, the isobars are now starting to swoop in and have this northerly gradient, which means you'll get pushed well off out of the strait from Gomera, in between Gomera and Tenerife. Just moving forward to noon on the 13th, the low pressure system is really starting to develop rapidly and still deepening, and that's gonna tweak the frontal zone a lot and also change the isobars, which are driving the wind direction a lot. So this one is one to look out for, but luckily for us, it's so far away that it's not directly affecting us. Instead, it's actually increasing the wind speeds. By the 14th, we expect kind of a dry, cold front with northerly winds pushing in. That helps you guys clear off the Canary Islands and get a bit further to the south, which can be ideal. But what I would like you to look into is just here you have this low pressure system, and it has fronts that stretches further down than 20 north. And usually, the previous years, we kind of been saying as soon as you get south of 20 north, you're more or less safe from a front, which can give you northwesterly winds and unfavorable conditions, headwinds. You have to deploy para-anchor, all these things. This year, possibly due to effects that's related to the strong El Niño that we're having this year, could actually cause a lot of problems eventually, because these low pressure systems sits further to the south than usual at this time of year, and they're developing in this part of the ocean, of the Atlantic Ocean, the westerly part, which is a bit unusual. Luckily, this one's then afterwards, it's going to migrate to the northeast, so it's going to kind of clear off. So it's not going to directly disturb you guys, but I just want to tell you that these fronts are something you would like to avoid. So that we can talk more about in the route planning. So here we see first the North Atlantic Oscillation Index forecast. That's something that on a larger scale tells about what systems we can expect. And as you can see, since end of November, beginning of December, we had a really huge dip with unusual weather situations. So we had a negative North Atlantic Oscillation Index forecast, which might have had fewer storms, colder northern Europe, and low pressure systems developing in unusual places. And also this high pressure system is less stable than usual. But luckily it seems like we're changing to a more positive index from now on, and that should give more stable trade winds, and that means a bigger push in the back and fewer storms where you are located, but more storms to the north, and hopefully a safer crossing. Since it's El Nino and the oceans in general are warmer than usual, that also gives bigger temperature gradients between the cold. I mean that's more gradients from the cold to the hot parts of the ocean that develops more storms, and they can be more intense. The Southern Oscillation Index is also what you refer to as El Nino. It's in a very negative state right now, which happens every now and then, but the past many years it's been positive. That strong El Nino, which is this phenomenon with a very hot water coming from Australia and hitting South America, changes all the usual patterns of the atmosphere, and that also affects indirectly to the Atlantic Ocean. So it's something to keep an eye out for, and that's why I say usually this is related to fewer storms maybe, but deep storms in weird locations. So we could have some odd storms that could go and make a mess. It's reflected here in the sea surface temperatures. Everything that's red to yellow in this chart is warmer than usual. That means the Atlantic Ocean, which we're having here, especially around the Canary Islands and this area where you'll be crossing, is fairly warm. You also see that some places it's blue, which means it's actually a bit colder than usual. So the gradients here are strong. So we can expect maybe more storms than usual to spawn here, because these storms are usually spawning where you have big differences between the cold and the hot and very short distances. So that's one thing to look out for. In general, when we talk about this Atlantic crossing, if we did not have any weather, it would be very obvious to just point the compass to the Great Circle direction from San Sebastian straight to Antigua. But reality is that we have trade winds on our tail. We have the equatorial current, which we want to benefit from. So very often it's favorable to take a more southerly route, especially in the beginning. One, to make it more safe and avoid hitting those low pressure systems, because there's a limit to how far south they will go. Two, to get some tailwinds. And three, also to actually benefit a bit more from the equatorial current, which is also stronger further to the south. In general, when we do the routing, maybe if we add 50 to 100 nautical miles to the route, that would take 1 or 2 days more in a duo to cross. But when we then do route planning on that, which means we take into account the push you get from the back, you actually end up with a result that's 2 days earlier. So that means you reach the goal 2 days early, even though you take a route that's maybe 100 nautical miles longer. So please take that into considerations. So the shortest route, to narrow it down, has higher storm risk, less tailwind, and potentially slower ETA. Whereas an alternative route, this is just one that I quickly made, actually gives you stronger tailwinds, more current at your tail, and lower storm risk, and definitely a faster ETA. So that's really something to balance based on the weather. If we look at the historical route options, you can see there's always been this kind of curvature to the routing. And one thing that's significant is always those that goes further to the north, which have had a tendency to usually be the solar rowers, they get whirled around here. So when you see such a spike on the route, it's usually because they get sucked up by a low pressure system passing to the north, and then the front eventually kicks in. They have to deploy the para-anchor and wait for 1 or 2 or 3 days before they can continue, and the storms have let go. Actually, this year we've been seeing storms being very well located, so they don't actually move a lot. They don't quickly move on. They stay in the same place. So it's really important to avoid them. So the more you look on the southerly favored routes here, with the ones that have been going further south, they have less of a kink every time. So the more you go to the north, the bigger the risk is of a storm. In this 2018, which was my first race, you can see some wind maybe too far south, but it's about to balance it. If the trade winds are just strong and steady, it's one route option. If not, then it's another. 2019 has come to the same picture, but here in this is actually the one from 21. They actually had to avoid a storm that was coming in fairly fast after the race start, and everyone went far south. And I think the winning one is the yellow here, so you can see that yeah, they didn't go straight. They actually went almost with heading towards the Cape Verde Islands, and then bearing off towards the west when they went halfway there. So please consider to do this, one, for your safety. Also, it's a lot faster. When I'm looking at some of the routing options, I can try to share here. So what I'm looking at here, for example, is a route that is maybe a bit exaggerated in this particular case, and it depends a lot on how fast you're going. But in this particular case, the route is around 150 nautical miles longer, and that means it will take 1.5 days more, or if you go on average 3 knots. But it's only 0.1 to 0.2 knots you have to gain from tapping in further south to the trade winds and the tail currents to make up for that. And often you might get even more out of that, because you're avoiding probably several days further to the north where you have no wind, or maybe even if you're out of luck, some headwind. So in this case, you can see it's saying finish in the far future 38 days from here, and if we go for the straight route option with the same start, yeah, it's saying 36, but it's not taking account in the boat speed here all the extra pressure you get at your tail if you choose the right route option. Obviously, this is a bit different whether you're a solo rower rowing 1.3 on average, or you're quad rowing 3.7 knots. You can use Windy as a tool where you can actually make your own routing suggestions. So if you do this, and just to show you quickly, if you right click here at Gomera and say distance and planning, you can make your own route and see how is the forecast going to be along that route, and you can set the start point where we want, and you can even set your expected boat speed here, 2 knots in this case, and then you can pull the starting time to Wednesday at around noon, so like this. And then you can, by pulling this arrow, you can actually see how the weather develops as you move. As you see that little white dot moves along the route, you can see what is the weather going to be like, how's the waves and sea state, and how much wind will you have at your tail, and can you avoid a potential front that's coming. That only works for 1 week ahead, since after that you basically don't know how the forecast is going to be, but it gives you an idea of how to get well out of the gate. Excuse me, sorry. So if we look at the sea state from after we start, to begin with, the sea state is fairly calm, but there's some push from northwest, and then a few days after you're heading out, you're getting a building trade wind swell at your tail, combined with some northwest swell. So that means you have this perpendicular swell with different period, where the trade wind swell from northeast, which is building because of the wind from your tail, has shorter period. These storms that are producing further to the south and also way up north, south of Greenland, are pushing a lot of more long period swell in, which is giving this perpendicular rolling, which can be a bit tricky to deal with. And the sea state is growing to be significant up to here. We're looking at well ahead in time, when it's up to 4 meters maybe if in about a week from now. But to begin with, it's going to start to be more calm. Depends a bit on how these storms are developing. If we look at the currents, I have to say that these are modeled in another way than the atmosphere and the weather forecast. So maybe the uncertainty is a lot greater, but there's this huge eddy to the south of El Hierro and Gomera that has been modeled. So that means if you're unlucky, you can get into a huge countercurrent, and it's up to you to decide whether you trust this model and you want to maybe change your routing so you go with the current and get one knot at your tail from the current instead of fighting it, or you want to maybe try to avoid it by going a bit further to the north of this eddy, and then go down more directly. And again, it's very hard to say whether this is there and where it's actually located when, but it is something to take into account. So maybe it's worth also studying this current map on Windy, because it is reflecting something that has been modeled physically. And just looking at the weather ahead in time, how it looks like the weather's going to be decent to begin with. So here we have the cloud cover. So once here on Wednesday the trade winds are kicking in strong, the skies are going to clear off, and you can see all that little white dot is a boat moving on with 2 knots. And for the first several days ahead, it's going to be nice and clear weather with actually fairly strong tailwinds, while the front is moving way to the west, causing a lot of trouble further west, more clouds, some rain, and some wind interruptions. But it's looking real nice for the first period ahead here. Then later on, it's going to be difficult to say how it's going to be, because this weather forecast is only reaching out a bit more than a week ahead. And then climatology tells us, as well as all the experience we have, that it's really worth moving well south. I can't emphasize that enough. Making it well south before you move west is always a good idea, and usually would say the threshold for kind of being safe with fronts is usually 20 north, but we have been seeing exceptions of that lately. So, but we're crossing our fingers that now we're shifting to this more positive North Atlantic Oscillation Index. We might have a fewer storms and more stable trade winds. I'm crossing my fingers for that at least. So I would like to also go a bit more into detail of how we get out the gate. That means when you start La Gomera, there's some local effects we would like to take into account. So just a sec here. So I'm going to scroll down to. We talked about the sea surface temperatures. We can maybe touch upon already. It's sea surface temperatures around the Canary Islands is 21 degrees. Also a bit hotter than usual, as I mentioned before, and in the average index. And then soon you'll be crossing into the 22 to 24, and when you are halfway there, you'll be having quite hot conditions with more than 26 degrees centigrade. So route options we talked about. So this local effect, which I'd like to call the Gomera jet, which is the wind running in between Gomera and Tenerife, when the trade winds are on from northeast, actually get quite strong and accelerated due to the elevated topography of both islands. So there's a lot of acceleration zones just outside the harbor of San Sebastian. If you stand on the harbor wall, you can actually look out and see how windy it is once the wind kicks in. Luckily, we have also a huge wind shade behind the mountains here, where you can kind of take off nice and easy and calm in the shade of the island one. But you could also decide to go out and tap into the jet. I've been resolving this in a local area model, which you can see here. It's a model where you can see this is Tenerife, this is Gomera, and this is north, this is south. And you can say the more blue and white the colors, the less wind there is. So this is around restart, Wednesday the 13th at 8 o'clock local time. There's a huge shadow here behind the island where there's absolutely no wind, maybe even a little bit of recirculation, but usually it's very calm. On the other hand, just next to here, San Sebastian's this little red dot where it says restart. Right here, you actually have a jet that pushes strongly with 15 knots or maybe up to 20 knots, even from the beginning of the day, straight south. So you can either decide to take a nice and easy, calm exit, or you can actually go a bit to the left when you head out and get closer to Tenerife and tap into this tailwind where it's more bumpy. It's definitely also wavier, but it's also windier, and there's also probably some surface current that it's going to push you south And that's really what you want to do now. You want to take advantage of this strong push that we have, which is very beneficial the 13th from north and northeast to push south, because later on the wind will change a bit and revert, so you have to kind of and push you further to the east. So this jet is just intensifying during the day. This is at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and then if we look for late in the evening, it's actually showing really strong winds with 25 to maybe 30 knots. Where the jet is located, still this calm zone is still there. It's moving a bit further to the west, and you also have this huge calm zone between Tenerife, and then you have this combination of the Tenerife Gran Canaria jet that kind of combines with the Gomera and Tenerife jet, and then and the next morning, Thursday, it's kind of shut off for the Gomera jet, but then you have this very strong jet turning more to become more of a northeasterly to easterly push from Tenerife. And if you can go down and tap into this one, you get a lot of push in the right direction as well. By Friday, we expect the jet to still be around 20 knots on average in between Gran Canaria, Tenerife, and stretching way beyond El Hierro here. And that's something where you can also benefit. So hopefully you manage to get well south and then more west. But then later on Friday, it's going to calm down a little bit. So the wave push we expect from the beginning is, as I mentioned, we have some old decaying swell coming from northwest at 1.5 to 2 meters maybe, which you'll experience once you get out there. It's more like slow rolling swell with higher period. Later on, the straight wind swell, when you get this strong wind push, also starts building at your tail. And in a week from now, as I mentioned, when you get further out, we expect some swell associated to the storms we've been experiencing. Yeah, the currents we already talked about, so that's actually it for me for now. If I see any updates in the weather forecast, I will make an update video tomorrow. If it looks steady, possibly it's not needed. So, but as you can see here, the equatorial current is a very messy picture, but so you could end up in a counter current, but from a climatological perspective, if you can avoid this big eddy in the beginning, the further south you get, the more push you get at your tail, also from the currents. In particular, this counts for the trade winds, but yeah, don't exaggerate it too much. But adding a few up to maybe 200 nautical miles can actually be well in your favor. Thanks for your attention, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Good luck.